This video is for just a few people, the chosen few of us, let's say, that have septiles in our chart. And it's very uncommon. It's an angle between two planets that essentially acts like a Chiron type of wounded healer type of energy, as I'll explain. And it's uncommon partly because if this angle, if that septile becomes, the orb of it becomes too wide, it suddenly gets washed into a sextile. It'll look like a sextile in your chart. So, we have to define it narrowly as astrologers, and it's something that kind of forces those of us who have it into spirituality, just to survive, just to hang out and be able to work on planet Earth. So it's something of great interest to me because I have a lot of them, and I've had to deal with them, and I've had to figure out what they are. If you have them, I think you'll find this video interesting. If if your best friend or your child has them, you might want to look into this. Other than that, you probably won't benefit from much except the next thing I'm about to say, which is basically what is an aspect in general. So in our astrological charts, we not only look at what planets are in what signs and what house, but we also look at sacred geometry that they make to one another. So when two planets make what is considered a significant angle, it's called an aspect. And we can look at it as divisions of the circle into various whole numbers. So for example, the conjunction is when you take a circle and divide it by 1, so 360 degrees or 0 degrees. So if you were to look in the sky, two planets that are conjunct are basically, ideally, they're right next to each other or on top of each other. So that means that their energies operate as one. And from a Kabbalistic standpoint, it resonates with Kether, or one, that I am principle, that's the top sphere of the tree, that point. The second division of the circle, dividing the circle by 2 equal parts, is the opposition. So two planets that are opposite one another will be 180 degrees. They will force you to balance those two things because they pull in two opposite directions. In the ancient times, that was considered a difficult angle. It's one that definitely requires more skill than some angles. And again, with regard to the Tree of Life, it could be thought of as somehow resonating with Chokmah, 2, or true will, or the angel. And I apologize, I'm not going to get into the specifics of that in this video. If you're interested, let me know and I'll be happy to do one. But here I just want to point out that you keep dividing the circle, and you eventually sit, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 equal parts. That's the septile. So that's what we're talking about here. Dane Rudhyar is an astrologer who has written about the septile. Not a lot of people have, and the ancients didn't look at it as far as I'm aware. He wrote about it and noted that if you divide the circle through the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the first time you get a degrees, each one of the degrees is usually an integer until you get to the septile, and then suddenly you cannot express that angle as an even number, or sorry, I should say an integer. So it's 52.42 blah 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 blah, and that's and it repeats on to infinity. So it's like I guess it's like 6 numbers after the decimal point that repeat into infinity. But that's the best you get. So his interpretation of that difference between the septile and everything that came before it is that leftover, as he called it, after the decimal point, gives you something that it's like the end of a cycle. And now, when by cycle I mean the two planets start out conjunct and they kind of move into different. They move together, and because one planet moves faster than another seen from Earth, it suddenly they're basically moving through a whole bunch of angles, and finally they'll end up back conjunct again after some time. So he's looking at that type of dynamic between the planets, thinking about it over time, and he says, with the septile, when you reach the septile, it's what's left over, those numbers at the decimal point. They represent, or they symbolize, stuff that you have to integrate into the next and take it as he calls it a seed into the next cycle. So he's really looking at these planets and the way we use the energies as creation. And he's saying that people who have the septile need to use that energy to take it into the next cycle and not waste it. So that's kind of already a challenge. It's not an easy thing to do because it requires integration of things that are basically trash. It's things that are left over, that are garbage, things we didn't look at, and the need for someone with a septile between two planets to take what's left over at any given time using those planets and keep repurposing them, recycling them, reusing them. So that's his interpretation, and I like his interpretation. However, I found I needed to go deeper with my own septiles. It seemed more troublesome than that for me. So let me give you my interpretation, and I'd love to hear from you if you have septiles and you have worked with the troubles they've caused and you found solutions. I'm very interested to hear how you've worked with them. For me, having septiles between numbers of things in my chart. So what I've noticed is that the two planets that are involved in the septile, or in my case, I also have one planet to the midheaven, they basically cause me grief and trouble, like a Chiron type of an interaction, when I try to be happy in the world, just like for my ego, as it were. So what's happened is, what I've noticed is that those things that I keep trying to fix and solve, and I never get my ego's satisfaction through those particular combinations, then I can find satisfaction by basically working those things for spirit. So I'll give you one example of my many examples. So I have the moon septile, my midheaven, so my moon's in the 8th house, conjunct Mars, and it's septile the midheaven. Actually, that's septile also. And so, besides any issues with moon conjunct Mars, which is its own little issue in the 8th house, the moon, it's the principle of being a female, feminine. It's the principle of being a nurturer, someone who takes the light of spirit and mirrors it and works with it to manifestation. And being in the midheaven is my legacy. It's what I'm supposed to do in the world. It's what I came here to do, my calling. So, frequently in our society, we think about, well, how are you going to make money in the world? What is it? Maybe they'll say, you're going to be a mom or something. But even these days, that's not okay. It's like you have to choose to do something, a big job. You have to have a title and a big desk and a big placard on your desk and things. So in my case, if I were to pursue that route of just being successful in the world and being recognized and making money and having a big 401k and things, that would not create happiness for me. It would not actually work, because it would not make me sane. My moon being septile, the midheaven, says you need to work your feminine side, your femininity, toward humanity as a whole, toward true will, and make that your legacy. So that's a huge part of what I try to do in my personal work, my work with students and my astrology work. And that's something I've been forced into, and I'll just, honestly tell you that I've had a lot of struggles through the years, like a lot of difficulty with my feminine side, and it's forced me to understand the feminine. And there's more that I'm not telling you about my chart, but, I've been forced into kind of really working with the feminine in this philosophical way and a very intentional way. For my magic and for, again, spirituality. So that's just an example whereby I basically would be in a basket case if I wasn't to work with my septiles in a very humanitarian or for the aeon type of a way. And so if you're interested if you have questions about your particular septiles, you can put them in the comments. If I get enough that are kind of in a certain thrust, I may do another video. But also, again, let me know if you have discovered ways of working with your septile and what your experiences have been.